divorce in the following manner, he can do that. He can say to a woman, here's your divorce document in front of witnesses, and by this document you shall be divorced immediately if for 30 days it doesn't rain. That's a perfectly valid divorce procedure. And if it's dry for 30 days, then she will divorce immediately upon receiving the document. The divorce is not delayed for 30 days. Only the condition which determines whether or not there's a divorce at all is 30 days. And if raised to 30 days, then the document is null and void. Now, let's imagine that he does, instead of talking about rain, he says the following. This is your divorce document, and you should be divorced immediately on condition that you do not get married for 30 days. You can do that. Let's suppose that on day 15, she goes through a perfectly normal, regular marriage ceremony. What is her status on day 16? Is she married to someone? If so, whom? What is her status on day 16? Well, let's try it out and see what happens. Let's take it as a hypothesis and see if we trace the consequences and see what conclusion we draw. So there's man number one, whom she has been married to before, and man number two, the one with whom she had the ceremony on day 15. Let's say on day 16, she's married to man number two. Day 16, she's married to man number two. Well, that violates the condition that man number one put on his divorce. He said, this document, you're divorced today only if for 30 days you don't get married. So if you say that on day 16 she's married to man number two, it means that on day 15 she got married to man number two and thereby violated the condition on the get, on the divorce. So that means that man number one's divorce didn't work, wasn't valid. But if man number one's divorce wasn't valid, then on day 15, she was still married to man number one. And now she went through, and if you were suspicious of me, as you should be, you should have noticed I changed the description, didn't I? All it said about day 15 was she went through a normal marriage ceremony. But if she's married to man number one, going through a normal marriage ceremony on day 15 does nothing. It's not valid. A woman can't be married to two men. So a married woman who goes through a marriage ceremony to somebody else other than her husband doesn't get married by that divorce, by that marriage procedure. And since she didn't get married on day 15, then it turns out that she didn't violate the divorce. And since she didn't violate the divorce, then the divorce was valid. Since the divorce was valid, then she is married to the second guy. So if you say that she is married to the second guy, then it turns out that she violated the condition on the divorce, and she violated the condition on the divorce, then she wouldn't be married to the second guy. If you say she isn't married to the second guy, then she didn't violate the condition on the divorce, and then that would mean that she is married to the second guy. So whatever you say, you can deduce the opposite. That's called a paradox. A straightforward paradox. Whatever you say, you end up contradicting yourself. This case is mentioned by the Rishonim 500 years ago, 700 years ago in the divorce case. What happens? What happens is that if she wants to become free to do as she pleases, she will have to get another divorce from the first guy and a divorce from the second guy. Only then will she be free and clear of any entanglements to either man. But here's a case where the halacha allows you to construct a paradoxical case, and then the halacha is to tell you to do. Well, once you've constructed this paradoxical case, where there's no stable way to describe her condition, then she has to undo the condition entirely in order to become free for the future. That's one type of paradoxical case. There's another type, which is the situation is raised by a comment that Tosfos makes on the Gemara in Yuma. When you make a mincha offering, a flour offering, of which there are several types, and some are fried and some are boiled, and it's all very complicated, you're supposed to take a small portion of it in your hand and put it into a vessel and burn it on the altar. This small portion of the flour offering is like the blood of an animal, which also goes on the altar. And you put your 3 middle fingers into it, and you take some flour out, and that's what goes on the altar. Now, the Gemara makes the following remark. Well, when you do that, flour could end up in 3 different places vis-a-vis your hand. Could end up in your palm, because you used your 3 middle fingers to pull some up and put it in your palm. So there'll be some flour on your palm. There could be some flour on the back of your hand, because the vessel is holding flour, so it could stick to the back of your hand. And there could be some flour in between your fingers. So the Talmud says, the flour that's in your palm is kosher. It's usable to be put on the altar. It's called the kamitza. The flour on the back of your hand is certainly not usable because it's not in your hand at all. What about the flour between your fingers? What is the status of the flour between your fingers? That's the Gemara's question. And the Gemara answers the question. It's a suffix. A suffix means we don't know. So Tosfos says, listen, you asked the question because you didn't know, right? And now the answer is we don't know. We knew that you didn't know beforehand. What kind of answer is it to say that it's a suffix? It was a suffix beforehand. So Tosfos raises this question. He gives a very interesting answer. He says, the Gemara is telling you it's a permanent suffix. You're not going to solve it. This is beyond your ability to solve. Okay, that's more than what you knew before. But other Rishonim, the Ritva and others, read it differently. They read it as follows. Normally a suffix, a doubt, is a case where you're missing information. Either you don't know the facts of the case, or you don't know the law that applies to the case, which means that your doubt could be resolved by acquiring new information. The Gemara's statement that it's a suffix means that here, the flour in between your fingers falls between the 2 halachic criteria, and therefore the Gemara's judgment on it is that it's a suffix. Not that you don't know which the law is. Maybe you'll ask another Tana, and maybe he'll tell you, I have a tradition from Moses. No. The law said on this case that it's to be treated as a case which is in between the 2 criteria. And there's another case like this. I heard this from Rabbi Soloveitchik in Boston 1,000,000 years ago. There's another case like that's mentioned that is explicitly like this in the Gemara in Mishnah in Kedushin. Marriage can be conducted in a number of ways. One is where the man gives to the woman some item of value. And the principals, the man and woman getting married, don't have to actually perform this action themselves. They can assign agents. So the man could assign an agent to give the ring, and the woman could assign their agent to receive the ring, and then the 2 agents meet, and his man's agent gives the ring to the woman's agent, and they become married. That's perfectly valid. Now, the question is this. Let's say 2 women each assign one person to be the agent for each of them. They may not even know about it. Sarah and Rivka both choose Penina to be their agent, singly. Each one singly her agent. A man knows this, and the man says to Penina, here's a pruta. A pruta is just enough value to marry one woman. Here's a pruta, and with this pruta, I want to be married to one of Sarah and Rivka. And he gives her the pruta, and Penina takes the pruta. Okay, but which one? Well, there's nothing in what he said and nothing in what he did that determines which one. So the Gemara, the Mishnah calls this a suffix. He's suffix married to Sarah and suffix married to Rivka, but it's not a suffix where you could where there's missing information. We know everything. We know everything that happened, and we know all the laws. There's no doubt about anything. There's no missing information. The law says treat it as a doubtful case. And this, said Rabbi Soloveitchik, is what we mean when we say that the twilight period between Friday and Shabbos is Safek Yom and Safek Lava. Or any twilight period, sorry. The twilight period in the evening is Safek Yom and Safek Lava. It means that, not that we don't know which it isn't that Moses didn't think of asking God, let's see, let's clarify this. Well, which do you mean? It should be day or night? No. The law is to treat it as something which could be day and could be night, and neither is fixed. And by the way, it's really important to notice here that twilight, it isn't twilight. It isn't the fact that it's semi-light, because in the morning there's no such period. In the morning, the transition from night to day is instantaneous. So there's something about going from day to night, not about twilight. Twilight's not the issue. So this means that the law has cases, or allows you to construct cases, where what you do is a combination of two factors on the grounds that you can't put it into either category. Not that I'm missing information about it. It's an objective suffix rather than simply a lack of my own information. So this is a case of how to look at what a suffix is. I would say 90% of the time, 95% of the time, a suffix is simply a lack of information. But there are some times when it is the positive decision about the situation. Now let's try a different type of case. The Gemara describes the dimensions of the temple and the various rooms in the temple and so forth and so on. And in one item where the Aron is, they get the description that the width of the room is, from wall to wall, is 20 amas, and the Aron is in the center, and from one boundary of the Aron to the wall is 10, and from the other boundary of the Aron to the wall is 10. Mathematically, that would mean that the Aron takes up no space. The Aron takes up no space. Because from wall to wall is 20. And from wall to Aron is 10, and wall to Aron is 10. That's 20. So no room left. And that's the Gemara's comment. You see that the wall, the Aron didn't take up any space. Now, what are we supposed to do with a description like that? Obviously, the one who created the description knew that to the reader it's going to sound paradoxical. So some people want to try some fancy relativity. All was said was, these measurements have these values. But we know that on the basis of motion, the measurements of the person who's in motion vis-a-vis the other person is going to be different from the other person's measurements. Maybe it has to do measurements and perspective and inertial frames and so forth and so on. But there's another way to look at it. And this applies elsewhere. We spoke about this once about. Someone says something and the words to you make no sense at all. Let me give you some examples from secular realms, so you can perhaps relate to it in a more familiar way. You're a junior and you're looking for taking courses on the university, and you walk into introductory lectures in different subjects, and you walk into what's advertised to be a class in physics, and the professor says, one of the things we're going to learn this year is that sometimes with cause and effect, the cause can come after the effect. cause comes after the effect. How does that work? I mean, isn't the cause the thing that makes the effect? So, if the effect's already happened, surely the cause had to happen before that to make it happen. How else did it happen otherwise? And you think, that sounds crazy. But now, Richard Feynman said so when he had a PhD, and he had a Nobel Prize in physics. And John Wheeler, one of the greatest physicists, and they've had cases that they describe. So what you say is, these words in my vocabulary are paradoxical. But these words apply to a reality in a way that I can't even imagine. And when they apply to that reality, they aren't paradoxical. So these words have a meaning. It may even be that the words as I use them have a meaning that I don't imagine. That also could be. And that being the case, the words really describe a reality. It's just that I don't understand what the reality could be. Then you walk into another classroom, and this is a classroom in a certain type of mathematics, and the professor says, this year we're going to study infinity, and you will learn that there are infinities at different sizes. Oh, infinities of different sizes. Infinity goes on forever. And then what? There's one forever that's closer, and another forever that's further away. I mean, how does that work? There could be infinities of different sizes. Those words will make absolutely no sense to someone who hasn't studied the subject. The subject is called transfinite mathematics. It's one of the things I used to teach as part of my responsibilities for making a living. And there are well-founded mathematical definitions of different size infinities and so forth and so on. It's just that the listener has no clue what they could possibly mean. So again, what he says is, in my vocabulary, these words don't mean anything. But if this guy is being paid a salary to teach it, probably there is a meaning for it. I just don't know what the meaning is. So he could even say, somebody says, I heard somewhere that there are different sizes of infinities. What do you think about that? He could say, well, look, I discovered that at my university there's a course being taught in that subject. The professor said that's true. I can't imagine how it could be true, but if he said it, it's probably true. Otherwise, he'd get fired, right? So if he said it's probably true, it's just that I can't imagine how it's true. Now, we have descriptions in the tradition, which I think should be handled in that way. The Torah says at Sinai, the people saw the voices. You don't see sound. Not even in synesthesia you see sound. In synesthesia, you see red and you hear a trumpet. The seeing of the red causes you to hear the sound of the trumpet, or vice versa. That's synesthesia. But you see the color and you hear the trumpet. You don't see the trumpet. You see the trumpet sound. Here, something's going on, and the Torah uses the words, they saw the voices. The right relationship to those words, I think, is to say, well, I don't know what that means. In my vocabulary, it doesn't describe anything. But the Torah says, so there's got to be something for which these words are right, which I can't imagine, and I don't know what it is. But if the Torah says it's got to be true, whatever it means. I think that's what we'd have to say about the Aron. 10 and 10 is 20, and that doesn't leave any room for the Aron, and the Aron is standing there, right? And it means something that I can't imagine either, but it does mean something, and that something is true. It's not the kind of thing which you could imagine would be an honest mistake, because the mistake is too easy to see. It's too obvious to see. Someone says that, it's not because he forgot that 10 plus 10 plus 6 is not the same as 10 plus 10. That's not what's going on. So what's going on is that it's something which has a specialized application. Now, that's a third type of thing. And the last thing I want to do, and we'll do a little bit of history of science here. What do you do when you have a system and you have what look to be clear failures of the system? Clear failures. There is a parody of the scientific method which would give a very simple answer to that. It's a parody because it's totally unreal, but this is what a lot of people think science is about. And scientists are guilty of describing it this way also. Something happens, and you look at it and you say, wow, why is it doing that? And let's say it does that all the time. The aurora borealis, or the fact that in the northern hemisphere, still water, as it goes out, a hole in the middle, rotates counterclockwise, and in the southern hemisphere, rotates clockwise. Why do these things happen? You start with something you'd like to explain. Then you think up a theory. Wow, if ABC then would make sense. So maybe ABC is the explanation. But that's only maybe, because you've got to test whether it really is the explanation or not. So you say, well, if ABC is the explanation, then the stock market will go up. And then you see if the stock market goes up. You ask for a prediction, you check the prediction. And if the stock market goes up the way it's predicted, then you have reason to trust the theory, and you hold on to it and use it for the explanation. And the stock market goes down, and here's the key failure. The stock market goes down, that shows you that the prediction is wrong. So the theory is wrong. So you junk the theory, and you go and get another theory. That's how science works. Well, no, it doesn't. Because, as I heard from a philosopher whose work I don't have a lot of respect for, but I think he said this at a national convention, every scientific theory that has ever been used and believed and trusted had at the very same time known failures.
Standard deviation, standard error.
Well, that's usually in statistics. No, I mean straightforward predictions that are wrong. Straightforward predictions that are wrong. Every theory that has ever been used has straightforward predictions that are wrong. So, for example, you take the ancient view of how the astronomical bodies move, circles and epicycles and so on and so on, and you can predict fairly well when you'll see them, when you won't. You take the moon, which is a very tricky case, and if you look at the way they describe its motion, you notice that its distance from the Earth varies during the month. And it varies by a factor of 2. From the closest to the farthest distance, it's double, which means that the observed size of the moon should go down by a factor of 4. There ought to be a variation in the size of the moon from 1 to 4. There's no variation at all. That's a clear prediction that's dead wrong. Dead, and they knew it was wrong. It's just that the theory works so well in other things, you just, you don't say it's wrong and say maybe it's a hexagon, or maybe it's Swiss cheese. No, you keep it, and there's a failure over here, and you wait to see how you'll fix it. Maybe you need a radically new theory, and maybe you won't need a radically new theory. It depends upon what the future holds. You don't just junk a theory because it has something which is a failure. In Newton's theory, there is a prediction of how the planet Mercury should work, the precession of the perihelion, and it doesn't do it. It just doesn't do it. People didn't throw out Newton because he got Mercury wrong. Absolutely not. Let's hold on and see what will happen. Now, I want to compare what did happen with Mercury to another thing that really did happen and show you how these things can develop. The planet Neptune wasn't working right either. And some people said, well, Newton predicts it'll move this way, and it doesn't move that way, so Newton's wrong. So his theory of gravity is wrong, and maybe we have to change the theory of gravity. Other people said, maybe there's a hidden planet. Maybe there's another planet out there that's distorting the motion of Neptune. And this is a gigantic triumph. They calculated where that planet should be and how it was moving to explain the disturbances in Neptune. And they said to the astronomers, on such and such a date, you point your telescopes to such and such a place, and you'll find a planet. Now, millions of miles from here, space is very big, and planets are very small. Now you tell them, point your telescope to that spot to find a planet, and it happens. That's gigantic. And they found it. That's Uranus, the planet of Uranus. That gigantic triumph for Newton. His theories were right, so precise that you could predict where the planet would be. So they didn't have to fix the theory. And then they started hunting for a planet near Mercury to explain the deviations. They never found one. When Einstein did his calculations and predictions for general relativity, he calculated Mercury, and he got it right. Wow, it's right. Just imagine being in Einstein's shoes, where Sir Isaac Newton got it wrong, and your theory got it right. But it's an entirely different theory. All of Newton's forces are wrong. All of Newton's masses are wrong. All of his explanations are wrong. You had to change the theory entirely. But now when you're sitting inside the theory and you see the problem, you don't know that. You don't know which way it will go. You don't junk the theory because it has a wrong prediction. You live with the prediction, and you live with the failure, and you live with the rest of the theory, and you wait to see what will develop. And then you also can make a kind of intuitive judgment. How central to the foundations of the theory is this prediction? Where could the solution come from? Could it be something which is just peripheral? Maybe it's a misunderstanding of the exact definition of one term on the periphery, and the rest of it is true. Because the theory was adopted because it did some good work. So it's not rational to say, I see something in the Torah and I judge that it's a failure, and therefore I'm going to simply discard the entire Torah. It's not rational on scientific grounds to do that. If you think science is an arbiter at all. I mean, there are people who don't, but then one wonders what they think is an arbiter. So that would be even if you saw it as a failure. Now, there are many cases where, throughout the centuries, people have claimed to find failures in the scientific material of the Torah. And here there are several important points to be made. The great encyclopedia on this subject is a book called Torah, Chazal, and Science, written by Rabbi Dr. Moshe Meiselman, who has a PhD in mathematics from MIT, which I would guess to the people I'm speaking, you don't have. So before you get on your high horse and think that you have everything figured out, and it's 900 pages long, and he deals with a lot of these problems, in addition to a lot of other problems as well. So before you march down the aisle and say, I eat cheeseburgers because of this, you should at least look it up in his book and see whether he's got a solution for it. And you have a number of cases where people struggled with problems of this kind and who didn't pay very careful attention to the details of the problem. Here's one which some time ago I was looking at the apicursus websites, the ones that claim that they have refutation of the Torah. And they say the Mishnah in Eruvin says that pi is 3. And everybody knows pi isn't 3, the ratio of the diameter to the circumference of a circle. Look at that, the stupid rabbis, they don't even know that pi isn't 3. Well, first of all, if you made a measure with a stick and with a pencil and a piece of string, you could get a better figure than 3. Number 2, it isn't the rabbis, it's a verse in the book of Kings describing something that Solomon constructed. He constructed giant basins, and they were 10 amas across and 30 amas around. So it's a verse. So one explanation is this. One observation is this. So you tell me that 3 is a wrong value, huh? 3 is a mistake. So you tell me, what's the value? Oh, Rabbi, it's 3.14. Really? Exactly? Well, not exactly. It's 3.1416. Exactly? Well, it's not exactly. Oh, so tell me what it is. You tell me what it is. Well, we can't do that. Why can't you do that? Because not only is pi an irrational number, it's a transcendental number. Anybody know what a transcendental number is? Never. Good try. No, it's not even the solution to an algebraic equation. X squared equals 2 is an algebraic equation. The square root of 2 is irrational, but it's a solution of an algebraic equation. Transcendental is even further out. It's not, so you can't write it down. And the Rambam says on that Mishnah it can't be written down. It was only proved in the 17th century, hundreds of years after his death. But he wrote it down that he says just like pi, it's like 2, square root of 2, can't be written down. So now when the critic says that the rabbis got it wrong, nobody can get it right. So what exactly is the critique? Oh, well, it's not a very good approximation. Oh, really? That's your complaint. The rabbis could have made a better approximation. Maybe they had a reason for not making a better approximation. Maybe. So listen to what this is the Tosfos Rush makes the following remark. Since it's codified in a verse, then the impact of it ought to be halachic. The Mishnah was not doing geometry. And here's how it works. Let's suppose you're trying to fulfill a mitzvah, and you need to compare square measure with round measure. For example, a sukkah. We have the volume, the area that a sukkah should take up, a minimum sukkah, and now you're going to make a circular sukkah. And you want to figure out what should be the appropriate minimum area for a circular sukkah. So for that, you're going to have to use pi. The Mishnah is telling you, on the basis of the verse, when you convert square into circular, and you use pi, use the value 3 for pi. That's the value you should use. Every value you use will be approximation. This is the approximation the law wants you to use. And this is a tremendous chiddush because when you use an approximation, and you can actually tell whether it's on the low side or on the high side. And now, if you're deciding a biblical law, then you ought to resolve any doubt that you have on the stringent side. And you can calculate. If I use a smaller value for pi, it'll be, let's say, lenient. If I use a larger value for pi, it'll be stringent. So I ought to take a large approximation rather than a small approximation. And if it's a rabbinic law, then you are allowed to go with a leniency. So if the smaller one is lenient and the larger one is stringent, then you can use the smaller one. So whether you use the smaller one or larger one, you would think depends upon whether I'm being stringent or lenient in a biblical law or a rabbinic law. And the Mishnah says, don't do that. Always use 3, even if using 3 would lead you to be lenient in a biblical law, use 3 for the calculation. 3 is the one number that you use for those calculations. Now, where's the complaint? I don't hear it. I don't hear it. Speak up. Right? What did the rabbis get wrong? The stupid rabbis, the silly rabbis, inefficient rabbis? Somehow I don't hear it. This is not. It's gone off the page. And this leads to a general principle which has many, many applications. That is, when you're dealing with legal reasoning, we spoke about this with the voice from heaven. When you're dealing with legal reasoning, the relevance of facts, mathematics, laws of nature, psychology, history, all of that depends upon the legal principles. And someone from the outside who doesn't know legal principles will look at this as a mistake in the reasoning because he doesn't know the leading principle. So, for example, there's a case where, this is actually Machlekes Rashi and Tosfos, but for example, a person rents a house. And in the rental contract, it says, we don't want you to make reconstruction in the house. If you need to open an entranceway, it shouldn't be any more than 4 amos. Okay, so you can open it 3 amos. Now suppose he makes the opening by slicing off a corner. Slicing off a corner. How do you measure how big the opening is? Do you measure it by how much wall did he knock down? Or do you measure it by the area that you have to go through? That's 2 sides versus the hypotenuse of a triangle. So Rashi says that it's the hypotenuse. Tosfos, starting from his assumption, says everybody knows that the hypotenuse doesn't equal the sum of the two sides. Sum of the two sides is bigger. But the question here is a legal question. What's the prohibition? Was the prohibition how much wall you should knock down? Or was the prohibition how much opening you should leave? It had nothing to do with the geometry of adding up the sides and getting a total bigger than the hypotenuse. It has to do with the legal issue. So when you fill in the legal background, then the thing that looks peculiar. I asked Rabbi Meisel this question many, many years ago. Let's suppose you have a controversial issue, and you have the three greatest scholars of the day have different opinions, A, B, and C. And now someone comes to ask one of the scholars what to do. And he says, do A. That's my opinion. So I said, but look, the other two disagree with him. So in general terms, the 2/3 probability is wrong. In fact, I've had 2/3 probability that each one of them is wrong. So how can any one of them give his opinion and give his opinion as authoritative? So Rabbi Reisman said to me, in probability you're right, and in logic you're right, but in law you're wrong. That's the responsibility of an expert in the subject who doesn't have anybody over him to give the law according to his opinion. So the law says to do that. So there's no problem. The probability is against him and credibility is against him, but the law tells him that that's what he has to do. So if you don't know the legal background, it's very difficult to evaluate what the person's actually doing. Now, there was a case with, there are two cases. One where there's a certain condition, certain anatomical condition, which the Gemara classifies as fatal. The animal will die within a year. And there were people who claimed that they had such animals and they lived more than a year. Now, I'm going to tell you what the Rashba says. You might not be psychologically ready for this, but I'm taking that into account, but you know what he says. It depends on who told you. Because they claimed they had such an animal and they had it for more than a year. He says, if the people who are telling you this are non-Jews, their statements are worthless. Don't pay any attention to them. And in particular, he said, I would ask them, did you watch this animal 24/7, 365? No? Then somebody switched it. Somebody switched it for another animal, and the other animal died. However, he says, suppose you have credible testimony, which could happen. Then he says, your reaction should be what the Talmud says is right. A person, a creature with this anatomy will die, and I don't know why you saw what you saw. But the fact that you saw it is not going to convince me that the Talmud is wrong. And here's a similar actual case that happened. We say that any fish that has, fins has scales. And they brought, I believe it was to the Chasam Sofer, an actual creature which had fins and no scales. So he wrote about it, and others wrote about it, and there were various attempts to explain what the Talmud meant on its own terms to fit the case, and it was not satisfactorily explained until someone decided he's going to go and observe this creature in its native habitat. And it turned out that it lived in the mud under the water. It didn't live in the water. And when the water drained out, it stayed alive because it was living in the mud. It wasn't a fish at all. It wasn't any kind of fish. So here's the way the system works. You don't blink questions away. You don't pretend they're not questions. You demand credible testimony to frame the question. And then you say, I'm willing to live with the doubt. I'm willing to live with the problem because we may be able to anticipate what the solution is. Rabbi Meisman also, there was another thing, this fairly recently, same thing, and then it turned out that the fish that you're observing are spawned, they're in a large body of water, and they're spawned someplace else, and their first part of their life is in that other place, and while they're there, they have scales. And the Talmud explicitly says that if the scales fall off, that's okay. You don't have to have scales when you eat it. It's the species has to have scales. But nobody went up into the mountains to find where they spawned to go and see exactly what it was over there. So it turned out that, in fact, again, the facts were different from the way they were portrayed. So this is the kind of, when you do research into realia, you're ready for changes of mind and changes of observation, because that's what happens in life. Even people with good faith and who are reasonably thorough will make mistakes of that kind. Let alone when the challenge is on the basis of speculative theories, which when the Torah tells us how long people lived in ancient times before the flood, and they say, "Oh, people can't live that long." So I challenge them. Really? Can you explain aging? And say yes. I tell them, no, you can't, because there are like 5 different theories, and no one of them agrees with the other 4 theories. No one knows why people age. Well, if you don't know why people age, how can you confidently say they can't live that long? Maybe the circumstances were different, and under those circumstances, people can live longer. How can you just say that? Well, it's easy to talk, but it's not easy to give reasons. So one has to sort of loosen up. You hear a problem, okay, I hear a problem. I remember when biblical criticism was a big problem, when I was becoming religious, and I surveyed it, and I found cracks in the theory and so forth and so on. And then it's still being taught by some people. There's supposed to be different documents out of which the Torah was sewn together by an editor at a later time. And the proof that there are different documents is style of language and contradictions and redundancies and historical circumstances which dictate when things were said and when they weren't said. Those are basically, and then you try to figure out, for a particular passage, which author wrote this passage. It's a guy, I can't remember his name now. I wrote up against his book. This was maybe 15 or 20 years ago, and he said that of course it's speculative, and we don't have any ancient documents which give these different fragments. But the one thing that makes the thing credible is the fact that when you use contradiction as a criterion, and redundancy as a criterion, and literary style as a criterion, and history as a criterion, all the criteria agree on identifying the documents. So I thought, even though that's not a proof, we have cases where 4 different disciplines agreed on an outcome and turned out to be dead wrong. But if they do really agree, then that speaks for much more solidity than you would have thought it had. But it's just not right. They don't agree. The scholars don't agree on it. I'll finish with this. There's a wonderful book written by a South African, Johan Bogach. It was put out by Feldheim, called Genesis Genes. And he cites the fact that around the turn of the 20th century, if you ask someone, how old is the Earth? The answer was between 50 and 100 million years, 100 million years on the outside. And there were 4 different disciplines that agreed on that figure. One discipline was, this was Lord Kelvin, right? Heat. The Earth hasn't frozen. It's radiating heat into space. If it were older than 100 million years, it would be frozen solid. That's one. Another two is the salinity of the oceans. Salt washes from the land into the oceans. If we're older than that, the oceans would be more saline than they in fact are. Then there are the crevices that are dug by rivers, like the Grand Canyon was dug by the Colorado River, right? If the Earth were older than that, then there would be much deeper crevices. And the fourth one is stability of the solar system. Their calculations told them that it's not completely stable, and if over 100 million years, we wouldn't have a stable solar system. So you got 4 different independent disciplines, which gave the outside figure for the age of the earth as 100 million years. Well, 5 billion is 50 times as big. That's a lot. According to the current scientific picture, they're off by a factor of 50. All 4 of them together. Wouldn't you think that 4 independent lines of inquiry would seal it? You'd think that, but you'd be wrong. It doesn't seal it. So, if you study especially something about history or science, loosen up, take it easy. I spoke to some of you once about the fact that the universe has a beginning, which until 1965 nobody believed, and now it is the standard thing. Yeah, people try to get out of it in certain ways. They try to get out of it because they're prejudiced. But let me just start the insulin again. Just don't be bowled over by the wife once or twice. Yeah.
Great. So this you teed things up. The Jewish calendar. So it's a lunar calendar, but we have the adjustment so things align with the seasons.
That's right.
But then we have the modification with the leap year. Does it actually right?
Right. They're both necessary.
So does it
I'm
actually?
sorry.
Wait,
what modification?
Because we use the 7th year, right? Where we have some kind of reconciliation.
No. We have 7 years out of 19, which are adding an extra month. That's
yes.
But that's not then that. That's part of the calendar.
Oh, it's part of the calendar.
Otherwise, you would fall behind. You got to add in more month time.
Yeah, but I'm asking.
Yeah.
So I guess I want to. Could you explain? Does it actually work? It's not an if then. Like how does it? Because
it's a constant calendar. It was fixed almost 2,000 years ago, and in terms of the criteria that we need it to satisfy, it doesn't satisfy them exactly.
That's what I want.
But you need something to be within a certain thing, and you'd like it to be the edge instead of being at the edge, just a little bit inside. The criteria are all met. It's just they aren't met in the most efficient way possible. And if you compare that, this has actually been done by scholars. I haven't studied the calendar so carefully. If you compare it with the calendars that the Romans used and that the Christians used and so on, our calendar is much better than theirs. You know that in the 18th century they had to add 11 days to the calendar because it was falling behind. They went from the 7th to the 18th of the month in 1 month or something like that because they were falling behind. We didn't have that. Pesach still comes in the spring rather than in the fall. It doesn't come right in the spring. It comes a day and a half into the spring, but that's okay. So we have no failure in our calendar. It's like an insurance.
So it's better than the Gregorian.
Absolutely. No, better than the Gregorian. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's a big thing. I also view that putting blind faith into the scientific system is still faith at a certain point. It's very incomplete and fundamentally flawed. What do you make of previous generations of Rabbonim that made halachic attempts to reconcile things like astrology? Would you consider that as genuine like Torah rulings or an attempt to try and reconcile Jewish principles with another fundamentally flawed system?
Well, there are two things to be said there. There's the question of whether the planets and the constellations and so on are symbols of actual divine providence or whether everything's arbitrary. That's one question. And the other question is, do the horoscopes work? No rabbi, to my knowledge, ever pledged allegiance to a horoscope. No, none, not one. And the empirical studies make them absolutely stupid. Because they sent out horoscopes to thousands of people and asked them, do the traits under your birthday describe you? And they got back pretty positive results, with like something like 70%. But then they tried to control where they varied the traits so that the ones in the spring could put in the fall and so forth and so on, and the same number said it was right. So this is it's absolute nonsense. But our tradition is consistently that there is actual influence there. So it's not a question of reconciling us with them. It's our tradition that says so. There are verses in Psalms and other places that talk about it says Kodesh Baruch Hu gives a name to every star. You don't give a name to something that doesn't do anything. The whole idea of it is that they do have effect. So that hasn't been shown to be false, because the effects we're talking about are not the kinds of effects that they put into the horoscopes. And in this respect, I'll just mention one very, very brief thing, then I have to go. Maybe the most famous Gedanken experiment in the whole history of science is Newton's bucket experiment. Newton believed in absolute space and absolute time, and therefore he believed in absolute motion. And other people said, motion is relative. Is this table moving? Well, not with respect to the room, but yes, with respect to the sun. You can't talk about moving, it's going to be with respect to. So Newton said, I'll prove you wrong. Let's suppose you have a bucket that's half full of water and it's spinning. And you're sitting on the edge of the bucket. It's a big bucket. Now, you look up and you see, and you think, well, motion's relative. All I know is that there's motion between the bucket and the stars, but maybe the bucket's turning, or maybe the stars are turning. I don't know. It's all relative. So Newton said, look down. When you look down into the bucket, what are you going to see? You're going to see the water climbing up the sides of the bucket. Centrifugal force, so to speak. That proves to you that the bucket is moving and not the stars. That was Newton's experiment to prove that such a thing is absolute motion. Okay? Along came Maxwell, a couple hundred years later, and said, I tell you that even if the bucket is stationary and the stars are spinning, the water will go up. The gravitational force of the stars spinning will pull the water up. And in a universe where there are no stars, but there's a bucket and it's turning, the water won't go up. It's the relative motion that makes it go up. And that means he has another interpretation. And it means the stars contribute to how your ping pong ball works. Gee, nobody thought of that. Nobody dreamed of that. Nobody could have imagined that. Now, I have asked people who know physics well, is Maxwell's principle incorporated into Einstein's relativity or not? And the solid answer they gave me is, we can't tell. Can't tell? What do you mean you can't tell? Well, Einstein does it differently. He has different fundamentals and different axioms and so on and so on, and we don't know whether it's really in there or isn't in there. Okay, but here's an example of a surprising interaction, and when you hear that, again, you loosen up and think, well, maybe there are other interactions, we didn't expect that one. So I wouldn't be so positive that it's a discredited science in the simplistic sense of there are influences there, not in the sense of the actual horoscopes.